That night, the sleet came down on Michigan Avenue just as the main course was being cleared inside the ballroom of the Corinthian Hotel. Above the guests, stepping out for a smoke, hung a 30-foot banner that read, "The Boyd Foundation Annual Benefit for the Homeless of Chicago," while exactly 20 paces away, in the loading bay behind the building, a woman named Nell Whitaker sat folded on a sheet of cardboard in 3 thin layers and a pair of boots patched with silver tape. Her hand was pressed to her chest to make sure the photograph of her 12-year-old brother was still in her coat pocket, a thing she did every night before she allowed herself to close her eyes, and had done every night for 14 months. It was from that spot that she saw the old man come out of the alley, his sweater worn through at the elbows, 1 foot bare and gone purple with cold, his white hair plastered to his forehead, walking in a strange straight line, as though following a thread only he could see, and then walking straight off the curb into traffic. She was moving before she had time to think, both arms around his chest, hauling him backward with everything she had, and the delivery truck skidded past his bare foot, with the width of a hand to spare. When she asked him his name, the old man only raised his fingers to his temple, slowly, the way a person tries a door that has been welded shut, and told her he could not remember anymore. So the woman who owned nothing took the photograph out of her coat, moved it to her trouser pocket, pulled off the last coat she had in the world, and buttoned it onto his shoulders 1 button at a time, careful and certain, the way a nurse fastens a gown on a patient about to be wheeled into surgery. Behind her, the hotel's revolving door pushed out a breath of warm air and laughter. Phones came up one after another. A woman's voice said, "Get it on video. The homeless giving charity to the homeless." And a coin dropped into the muddy water in front of her boots with the words, "Pick it up, consider it payment for the performance." She never once looked down at that coin. She only raised her eyes to the banner hanging above the 8 people standing under the dry awning, and told them that tonight they had eaten dinner on money raised for people like her, and not one of them had stepped out from under that awning when the old man went down in the road. By morning, the video had passed 1 million views under the headline, "Beggar gives charity to beggar." In a shuttered bar on the north side, in the hour when the city goes quietest, 11 men stood around a map of Chicago, marked with 46 red circles. 46 places already searched, none of them the right one, until somebody held out a phone with both hands. A man named Emmett Rourke stood up so fast that the glass on the table rolled off and shattered on the floorboards, without a single person daring to bend down and pick it up, because the old man on that screen, the one being wrapped in a stranger's coat, in the freezing rain, was the man the entire Chicago underworld called by one word only, the old man. When someone asked what he wanted done about the woman, he did not look away from the screen. He only said that she had given away the last coat she owned to a man she did not know, while 300 people on his payroll had failed to find his father in 3 days. If this story reached you, leave a like, share it with the person who just came to mind, and subscribe to our channel for the stories still ahead. The clinic on the near west side smelled of wet wool and floor cleaner, and Emmett Rourke walked in through the double doors at the hour when the night staff had begun counting the minutes until the shift change, his coat still beaded with ice. 4 men left standing outside on the sidewalk because he had told them to stay there. The charge nurse at the desk was a woman past 60, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she listened to him ask about the unidentified elderly patient brought in the previous night, and then she told him she could not confirm whether such a patient existed, that privacy law made no exceptions for family who could not produce a name, and that she was sorry. He thanked her, and he meant it, and he walked out into the corridor and made 1 telephone call. He bought a cup of coffee from the machine by the elevators, and he had not finished drinking it when a man in a suit came down from an upper floor and put the entire file into his hands, and the woman with the beaded chain was no longer at the desk when he passed it again. He stopped, and he said quietly to the man in the suit that she was to be given another position somewhere in the system at the same pay, because she had done her job exactly the way it was written, and there were not many people left who did that. Room 11 was at the end of the hall, past a row of plastic chairs and a window that looked out on a parking structure. Emmett stood in the doorway with the file still under his arm and looked at the man in the bed, and for a moment he could not make the 2 pictures fit together, the one in front of him and the one he had carried for 23 years. Wendell Boyd had built half the waterfront out of nothing. Wendell Boyd had once made 3 men wait outside in the rain for 2 hours because they had been careless with somebody else's money, and had then fed them dinner himself. And Wendell Boyd was now sitting up against a stack of pillows in a hospital gown. both hands folded in his lap like a man waiting patiently for a bus, watching the door with the mild and open expression of somebody prepared to be helpful to whoever came in. "You'll have to excuse me," the old man said. "I don't think I caught your name." Emmett had been shot at twice in his life. He had stood in a shipping container in January and negotiated with a man who had every reason to kill him. Neither of those things had ever emptied him out the way that one polite sentence did. He came in and pulled a chair up beside the bed and sat down, and he said his name, and he said it again when the old man asked him to repeat it, and he watched his father nod, along with the perfect courtesy of a stranger being introduced at a party. "They tell me I was outside for a while," Wendell said. "I don't remember much of it, but there was a woman. Was there. She gave me her coat." The old man's hands moved a little in his lap, one thumb going over the other. "It was raining ice. She took it right off her own back, and she buttoned it up on me. Every button, like it mattered which order she did them in. I keep thinking about that. Nobody's done anything like that for me since I was a boy." He looked up. "Do you know who she was?" "No," Emmett said. "Not yet." "You should find her," Wendell said. "You should thank her for me." He said it 4 more times over the next hour. Each time it came out fresh, with the same small note of wonder in it. And each time Emmett said yes, he would. And each time his father thanked him warmly and asked him whether he had come far. The coat itself had been bagged and tagged and left in a bin under the window with the rest of the old man's clothing. Emmett took it out and laid it across his knees. It was a woman's coat, dark green, worn nearly through at both cuffs, the lining held together in one place with small, careful stitches in the wrong color thread, the work of somebody with steady hands and nothing else to use. He went through the pockets the way he had been taught to go through anything, slowly. And there were 3 things in them: a hospital identification badge with the photograph intact, and the name scratched off, ground away to bare plastic by something sharp, done deliberately and done more than once. A twist of waxed paper from a bakery, folded flat and kept, the way people keep receipts from days they want to remember. And a summons from the family court of Cook County, folded in 4, soft at the creases from being opened and refolded many times, with a date on it that had already passed, and the name of a boy who was 12 years old. Emmett read the name twice. Behind him, in the bed, his father was telling him again about a woman who had given away her coat. There was a room behind the card floor of the club on Wabash that had no windows and no name on the door, and the men who worked for Emmett Rourke referred to it only as the back, as in he wants to see you in the back. And a man who heard that sentence usually understood that his life had already been decided somewhere else and was now simply being read aloud to him. Emmett went there straight from the clinic, with the summons still folded in his inside pocket, and Ballard Shea was already on the concrete floor when he came in, on both knees, his coat gone, his tie loosened by his own hand, 4 men standing along the wall behind him in the kind of silence that has been practiced. Ballard had been running the freight books at the South Berth for 9 years, and for the last 2 of them he had been trimming a small percentage off every 3rd manifest, small enough that no one would look, patient enough that no one had. He had rehearsed something in the car on the way over, and he began to say it, and it came apart in his mouth after 11 words. Emmett did not tell him to stop. He crossed the room without hurrying, took a folding chair from against the wall, opened it, and set it down directly in front of the kneeling man. And then he sat, so that their eyes were level, which no one in that room had ever seen him do before. He reached over to the side table and poured a glass of water from the pitcher and set it down on the floor within Ballard's reach. "Drink that," he said. "You're going to be talking for a while." Ballard said that he had not said anything yet. "No," Emmett said. "But you will." Then he took off his watch. It was an old steel thing, scratched across the face. A watch that had stopped keeping good time before Ballard Shea was born, and every man in that room knew whose wrist it belonged to, and what it meant that Emmett had worn it every day since the old man's hands had started to shake. He laid it on the small table beside the pitcher, with the face turned outward so that the man on the floor could see it, and then he folded his hands, and he did not say another word. Nobody moved. Nobody touched Ballard Shea. The room simply held still, and the quiet went on, and somewhere past the door the card floor kept up its low, ordinary noise of chips and voices, and Ballard looked at the watch lying there on the table, and understood that this was not about money at all, that money would have been survivable, that the old man had been missing for 3 days while men on this payroll were busy stealing from him, and that the arithmetic of that was being worked out in front of him without a single accusation being spoken aloud. He started to cry before anyone had laid a hand on him. Emmett let a moment pass. Then he stood, picked up the watch, fastened it back onto his own wrist, and walked out, and the door closed behind him. Out on the street, the sleet had turned to a fine, cold rain, and his driver had the rear door open before he reached the curb. He got in and sat back and said, "The woman in the video. I don't care what it costs or who you have to wake up. Find her." They found her the next afternoon in the line outside the meal service on Peoria Street, which is a line that forms 2 hours before the doors open, because the people in it have learned that the doors do not stay open long. And she was not eating, and she was not waiting to eat. She was standing at the side of the door with a plastic grocery bag held out toward one of the volunteers, explaining that the things in it belonged to an old man who had been taken to a clinic, and that somebody ought to hold on to them in case he came back looking. Inside the bag was a paperback with the cover missing, a comb, and 1 shoe. The volunteer was trying to tell her that they had nowhere to keep it. Then the black car came up the curb lane and stopped, and the line went quiet the way a room goes quiet. All at once, and for no announced reason, and Emmett Rourke got out of the back seat into the cold without a hat and walked over to her, and every person in that line found something else to look at. Up close, she was younger than the video had made her seem and thinner than a person ought to be. And she looked at him, and at the car, and at the 2 men who had stayed by it, and she did not step back, which he noticed. He said he understood she had helped an old man on Michigan Avenue 2 nights ago. She said that she had. He took an envelope from his coat, thick and unsealed, so she could see what was in it, and he held it out to her, and he said that the man she had helped mattered a great deal to him, and that this was not charity, it was payment for a service, and that she should take it and put it somewhere safe, and not tell anyone she had it. She looked at the envelope, for what seemed to him a long time. Then she put her hand flat against it, and pushed it back toward his chest, not sharply, the way a person pushes a door closed behind them, and she said that she had not done it for a receipt. He stood there with the envelope in his hand. He had been refused money before, but only ever as an opening move, only ever by men who wanted the number to go higher, and in the world he had lived in since he was 11 years old, there was no such thing as a person who wanted nothing. There was only a person who wanted something so large that they had not said it yet, and he was already turning that over, already deciding what she was going to ask for and when. So he asked her what she did want, and she said the only thing she had come there to say, which was whether the old man was still alive. He said that he was, and he had started to add that he was being cared for, and that the best people in the city were looking at him, but she had already picked up the grocery bag and set it down by the wall where the volunteer could not refuse it, and she was walking away up Peoria Street with her shoulders drawn in against the wind, and she did not hear the rest of it, and she did not look back to see him standing there holding money that nobody wanted. They brought Wendell Boyd home on the Thursday, out to the house north of the city where the lawn runs down to the water, and the wind off the lake comes up through the bare trees all winter long. And for the first hour he was so pleased with everything that Emmett had to leave the room, because his father walked from the entry hall to the front windows the way a guest walks through a house he has been invited to for the first time, admiring the woodwork, asking who had chosen the paintings, saying it was a lovely place, and that whoever kept it up had good taste, and it was his own house, and he had lived in it for 31 years. Royce Dunham arrived before the doctor did. He came in shaking rain off his coat, and he went straight to the old man and took both his hands and held them, and he called him by his first name. And when Wendell did not know him, he did not flinch or correct him. He simply said that they were old friends and that it was all right, and he sat with him for a while by the window. Later, when they gathered in the study, Royce poured for the lawyer first, and then for Emmett, and then for himself last, which was a thing he had always done, and he stood behind Emmett's chair and put a hand on his shoulder in the exact place a man's uncle puts his hand, and he said that whatever came next, they would face together the way they had faced everything else, that he had walked into this business beside Wendell Boyd when they were both young men with nothing, and that he intended to walk out of it beside him too. Then Halloran, who had been the family attorney for 22 years and who did not enjoy his job that evening, opened his case and laid a document on the desk and turned it around so that Emmett could read it, and the room went cold in the space of about 4 seconds. It was a petition for a determination of incapacity, filed with the probate division of the Circuit Court of Cook County, requesting that Wendell Boyd be declared no longer competent to manage his own person or his own affairs. Emmett read the caption twice. Then he read the date stamped across the top by the clerk's office, and he stopped. and he read it a third time. The petition had been filed 9 days earlier. His father had walked out of this house 6 days earlier. Somebody had gone to court to have the old man declared incompetent 3 days before the old man went missing. Halloran said that a hearing date had been set, and that under the statute the court had ordered a medical capacity examination by a physician of its own choosing, and that the examination would take place at a fixed date and hour, and that Wendell Boyd was required to appear in person. Emmett asked what happened if he did not appear. Halloran said that if he did not appear, the court would take that as an answer, and the petition would very likely be granted on the papers, and the man who held the standing power of attorney would then have lawful control of the person and the property of Wendell Boyd, and there would be no undoing it. And Emmett Rourke sat very still in his chair with his hand flat on the desk, and understood something he had never once had to understand in his adult life. He could not hide his father, because vanishing was a confession. He could not frighten this, because there was nobody to frighten, no man to sit across from, no room to bring anyone into. For the first time since he was 11 years old, the thing hunting him was not a person. It was a date on a calendar, and it was coming, and it did not care who he was. She went back to the clinic on the near west side because of the shoe, which sounds like a small reason and was not one. The plastic bag she had left at the meal service had gone wherever such bags go, and she had lain awake on the loading dock thinking about a man walking around in one shoe in February, and so she took the bus with her last transfer, and came in through the double doors in the middle of the afternoon, meaning to ask a single question at the desk and leave. And instead, she walked into the corridor outside the treatment bay, and saw 3 men in good overcoats standing around a wheelchair, and the old man was in the wheelchair with a blanket across his knees and his hands folded in his lap, looking up at them with that same terrible mild politeness, and one of them was crouched down beside him saying that they were going to take him home now. Nobody was shouting. That was the part she would remember afterward, that it was the quietest thing she had ever seen. Nobody covered his mouth or took hold of his arms. The one doing the talking had a leather folder under his arm, and he had already laid its contents out on the counter for the charge nurse, and the charge nurse had already signed, because what was on that counter was a healthcare power of attorney, notarized, naming an agent authorized to make decisions for a patient who could not make them for himself, and attached to it a transfer request and a physician's referral on letterhead. And there is nothing in the world more ordinary in a hospital corridor than paperwork, and nothing more frightening once you understand what it can carry away. Nell stopped about 10 feet short of them. She was wearing 3 layers and boots patched with tape, and she had not slept properly in 2 nights, and she knew exactly what she looked like, and she knew that the moment she raised her voice, she would become a disturbance, and security would walk her out, and the elevator doors would close, and that would be the end of it. So she did not raise her voice. She walked to the counter, and she said, to the nurse and not to the men, that she wanted to see the signature page, and that the agent's signature needed to be compared against a specimen on file before transfer, and that the transfer summary required a physician attestation, and could she please see the attending's counter-signature on the discharge, and was there a completed patient handoff form, because a transfer out of a treatment bay without a handoff form and an attending signature was not a discharge, it was an unattended departure, and the facility carried that. The man with the folder turned and looked at her properly for the first time. He asked, pleasantly, who she was. She said she was the person who had brought the patient in, and that her name would be on the intake, and that she would like the attending paged. The charge nurse hesitated, and the hesitation was everything, because in that hesitation Nell reached across the counter and picked up the phone that sat there for staff use, the old one on the coiled cord, and she said she was pulling the attending, and while her left hand was dialing, she turned every page of that folder flat on the counter with her right hand, and photographed each one with the little camera on the desk phone, front and back, the power of attorney, the notary block, the transfer request, the referral, 4 pages in about 11 seconds. And she did it without hurrying and without hiding it. And the man with the folder said, still pleasantly, that she had no business touching those. She said the documents were now part of the record. Then she reached over and hit the wall alarm. The tone went off through the whole floor, that flat repeating electronic note that no one can think through, and doors opened up and down the corridor, and Nell stepped back into the hallway and put both hands on the supply cart standing against the wall and tipped it over sideways across the width of the corridor, and gauze and basins and packaged tubing went everywhere across the floor, and she stood on the far side of it and said, loudly now, that there was a patient being removed without an attending signature, and that she wanted the house supervisor. It bought her 4 minutes, perhaps 5. The 3 men did not fight her for it, because they did not have to. They simply lifted the front wheels of the chair over the mess and went on down the hall at a walking pace toward the service elevator with their paperwork in order and a signature on file. And the last thing she saw of the old man was his hand coming up off the blanket in a small, uncertain wave. The way a person waves at someone whose face they cannot place, but who they think has been kind to them. The elevator doors were closing when Emmett Rourke came through the double doors at the end of the corridor, with the reins still on his shoulders, and he was too late by about the length of a breath, and he stood there looking at the closed doors. And then he turned and looked at the woman standing in the wreckage of the supply cart, with a telephone in her hand. The woman was waiting at the bus shelter on Ashland Avenue when Nell came out, standing under the light in a plain gray coat, with her hands in her pockets. And she did not pretend to be waiting for a bus. She said her name was Ruth Calloway, and she showed the credentials without making a performance of it and put them away again. And she said she had been sitting on the Boyd organization for 2.5 years, and that a woman who had just made 3 men walk down a corridor at a walking pace was of considerable interest to her. Nell said nothing. Calloway said she could offer protection, that there were programs for this, that a person in Nell's situation could be moved somewhere safe and kept there while things ran their course. Nell asked her what somewhere safe meant. Calloway said it meant a location. Nell asked whether it meant an address, a real one, the kind you can write on a form, the kind a judge will accept, the kind with a mailbox and a lease and a name on the lease. And Calloway paused a half-second too long before she said it was more complicated than that. And in that half-second, Nell had already picked up her bag. She said that she had spent 14 months learning the difference between a promise and an address, and that every person who had ever offered her the first one had done it instead of the second, and that she was not going to be somebody's protected witness, sleeping in a motel with no forwarding address, while a family court in this county decided what to do about her brother. Calloway said the offer would stay open. Nell said that was the thing about offers, and got on the bus. She rode it to the end of the line because it was warm and because the driver on that route had never once asked her anything. And it was later, sitting on the bench, outside the closed pharmacy on 63rd Street under the one streetlight that still worked, that she took out the little prepaid phone she kept charged at the library and opened the photographs she had sent herself from the desk phone at the clinic. She went through them slowly. The healthcare power of attorney, 4 pages, properly drawn, the agent named, the principal signature, shaky but recognizably a signature. Then the notary block on the last page, the seal and the commission number, and the date the instrument had been acknowledged. She looked at that date for a long moment, without understanding why her chest had gone tight, and then she counted backward on her fingers, the way a person does when the arithmetic matters, from the night of the sleet on Michigan Avenue, back through the days the old man had been wandering, back to the morning he had walked out of his own house. And the notary stamp on that page was dated before it, days before it. Somebody had sat down in an office with a seal and a register book and executed the documents required to take custody of a man who had gone missing. And they had done it while that man was still at home, still in his own kitchen, still eating his breakfast, before anyone on earth had a reason to believe he would ever go missing at all. He found her again 3 days later, which took him longer than it should have, and which told him everything, because a person with an address can be found in an afternoon, and a person without one can only be found by luck, and that was the whole problem laid out in front of him like a diagram. They sat in the back booth of an all-night place on Halsted Street, with 2 cups of coffee between them, and he did not open with the old man, and he did not open with gratitude. He said he had a proposal, and that she was going to hate the shape of it, and should hear all of it anyway. 1 year, a marriage on paper, filed at the county clerk, no ceremony beyond the signing, separate lives in every way that mattered. In exchange, she would have a legal residence, with her name on the deed of trust and a lease in her own hand, a documented income through the foundation payroll, and the best family attorney in the city, sitting beside her at her brother's permanency hearing, instead of whoever the county assigned that morning. Nell asked him why. He said because she was a witness now, and because he had spent the last 3 days learning what that meant. A woman who sleeps on a loading dock can disappear on a Tuesday, and nobody files anything on Wednesday. No landlord notices, no employer calls, no neighbor knocks. The city does not record it. He said he needed a witness who could not evaporate, and that a marriage license is the loudest document a person can carry, because it puts them in a registry and gives them a name that has to be accounted for. He said he was not offering her kindness, and she should not mistake it for that. She said she had not been in any danger of it. Then, she took a napkin and asked to borrow his pen, and she started going through the thing line by line the way a person goes through a bill they cannot afford. The money for Toby, she said, and then corrected herself. The money for her brother, for the guardianship filing and the school and the rest. That money had to go into an irrevocable instrument, in his name only, with no clawback, no conditions, no reversion to the payer, so that on the day this ended for any reason at all, there would be no leash and nothing for anyone to take back. He said fine. She kept her own name, on everything, on the license and the mailbox and the payroll. He said fine. Her own room with her own lock and the only key. And no one came through that door for any reason. He said fine to that too. And she looked at him for a moment, as if the speed of it worried her more than a negotiation would have. Halloran was against all of it, and the family attorney, a woman named Pruitt, who had done permanency work in that building for 19 years, was more than against it. Pruitt told her plainly, sitting across a desk with the file open, that marrying this man could cost her the boy outright, that the court would look at the household, and the household came with a name, and that a judge who might have given a formerly unhoused nurse a fair hearing would now be looking at something else entirely, and that she should understand she was trading one kind of risk for another kind, not for safety. Nell asked her what the alternative was. Pruitt said there wasn't one that she could see, and that this was exactly what she disliked about it. So Nell signed. And then, with the pen still in her hand, she said there was one more term. Emmett waited. She said that she could be silent, that she understood the difference between what a person is obliged to say and what a person volunteers, and that he would never once find her running her mouth about anything that happened inside his house. But she would not lie under oath. Not for him, not for his father, not for the boy, not for any amount of money in any trust in any bank. If she were ever put in a chair with her hand raised, she would answer what she was asked, and she would answer it truthfully. And if that was a problem, he should tear the papers up now, while it was still cheap. He sat back in the booth and looked at her for a long moment. In his entire life, in every room he had ever walked into, everyone had eventually told him what he wanted to hear. He said that he could live with it, and neither of them understood yet that this sentence would cost him everything he had. The house north of the city was the kind of place that does not announce itself from the road, a long, low stone thing set back behind a stand of oaks, with the lawn running down to the water, and inside it every room was warm in a way that Nell had forgotten was possible. Warm all the way into the corners. Warm at 3 a.m, warm in the hallways where nobody was standing. Ramona Diaz, who had kept that house for 11 years, showed her upstairs without asking her a single question, which was its own kind of mercy. And when the door closed, Nell stood in the middle of a bedroom bigger than the apartment she had grown up in, and did not touch anything for a while. Then she went into the bathroom, and turned the tap, and put her hand under the water, and waited. And it kept getting hotter. And it kept going. And there was no coin slot, and no line behind her, and nobody knocking, and she got in with her back against the tile, and she sat down on the floor of the shower, and stayed there for a long time with her arms around her knees, and she did not make any sound at all, because the habit of not making sound is the last habit a person loses. That night she took the top blanket off the bed, and made herself a place on the floor beside the door, close enough that her shoulder touched the wood, because 14 months teaches the body one lesson above all others, which is that you must be able to hear footsteps in the corridor before they arrive at you, and a mattress in the middle of a large quiet room hears nothing. Emmett saw it through the gap in the door on his way past near midnight. He stood there for about 4 seconds. He did not say anything, then or ever. In the morning there was a man in coveralls on his knees in the hallway, with a drill and a box of parts, changing the lock on that door, and when he was finished, Emmett came up the stairs and held out one key on a plain ring and told her it was the only one that existed, that the old cylinder had gone in the trash, and that nobody in the house, including him, could open that door now without her opening it first. She took it and said nothing, and she wore it on a shoelace around her neck for the next 11 months. The dinner happened on the Friday. It was the only night the whole apparatus sat down under that roof. 4 men along the length of the dining table with Royce Dunham at the far end pouring for everyone else first, and they talked about the South Berth and a container schedule and a customs broker who had become expensive, in a language that was half ordinary business and half something else, and Nell sat at the end near the door and ate, and understood about 60% of it, and let her face show none of that. Nobody looked at her. Nobody addressed her. She had been in the house 9 days, and to those men she was furniture that had arrived recently and would probably be moved again. Then one of them, a heavy man named Coyle who ran the freight books now that Ballard Shea was gone, said something about how the arrangement was clever enough and that nobody would look twice at the paperwork. And then he said, to the man beside him and not to her, that it was not as though anyone was going to check up on a girl picked up off the street. The room did not go quiet immediately. It took a second and a half. Emmett set his knife and his fork down on the plate, not hard, and he sat back, and he said, "What did you just call my wife?" That was all. He did not raise his voice, and he did not repeat it. Coyle started to say something about how he had not meant it that way, and Emmett kept looking at him without any expression at all, and the silence stretched out until it became unsurvivable, and Coyle put his napkin on the table and asked to be excused and stood up and left the room. And he did not come back to that table, and he did not come back to the south berth either, and no one at that dinner ever said his name in Emmett's hearing again. Afterward, in the hall by the stairs, Nell did not thank him. She stood with her hand on the newel post, and she said that she wanted to be clear about what had just happened at that table, because she had watched him do it, and she had felt the whole room turn, and it had not felt like being defended. He asked her what it had felt like. She said it had felt like a man reminding his people that something in the house belonged to him now, and that the reason nobody would ever call her that again was not that they had stopped thinking it, but that the label on her had changed owners. She said he had protected her with the exact same thing that had made her property in the first place, and that he should not expect her to be grateful for the improvement. Then she went upstairs, and he heard the sound of the new lock turning, and he stood in the hall a long while after it. The visiting room at the residential center on Wolcott Avenue had a low table, a radiator that knocked twice an hour, and a window that looked out on a basketball hoop with no net. And Toby Whitaker was at the table with a spiral notebook open in front of him and a pencil worn down to about the length of a thumb, drawing. Nell had gone to sign the log at the front desk, which took a while, and so for 6 or 7 minutes, it was just the boy and the man who had come in behind her, with his coat over his arm, and had not been introduced yet. Emmett looked at the notebook. Every page was a city. Not a real one. Or not exactly, because there were harbors in places where there are no harbors, and one of them had 2 rivers crossing in the middle like a pair of scissors, and every street had a name printed along it, in small, careful capitals, and the names were the good kind that a person invents when they are 12, things like Long Whistle Road and Ferry Bell Street, and one whole avenue called Almost There. "You made all these up?" Emmett said. "Some of them are real," the boy said. "Belfast is real. I just don't know what's in it. So I put in what I thought." Emmett set the thing he had brought down on the table, which was an atlas, an old one, the leather cover worn pale at the corners and the spine gone soft, the kind that has all the borders wrong now. And Toby opened it and went very quiet in the way that is the highest compliment a person that age can pay. He turned pages for a while. Then he looked up and asked how many of the cities in it Emmett had been to. Emmett said 1. The boy waited to see if that was a joke, and then he laughed, a short surprised laugh, and asked how a grown man ends up going to one city. Emmett said that when he was 11 years old there had been nobody around to ask him where he wanted to go, and that once you get past a certain age you stop expecting the question, and you just stay where you are and get very good at it. Toby thought about that. Then he said that was the worst answer he had ever heard, and that the man clearly needed the atlas more than he did. And Emmett laughed, actually laughed, which was not something that happened in the presence of witnesses, and told him to keep it. It was a gift. It was not going back in the car. The boy accepted this with enormous dignity. Then he turned to a page in his own notebook, one of the good ones with the 2 crossing rivers and a lighthouse drawn in the corner, and he tore it out along the spiral, slowly, so it would not rip, and handed it across the table. He said it was a fair trade, and that the man should put it somewhere he would see it. Nell came back from the desk to find the 2 of them arguing about whether a city could have a subway if it had no hills. The free clinic, where she had been quietly making herself useful 2 mornings a week, occupied the ground floor of a brick building on 22nd Place that had been sold twice in 5 years and was on its way to being sold a 3rd time, and everybody who worked there knew it, and everybody who worked there had stopped talking about it the way people stopped talking about a diagnosis. Then on a Tuesday, the doctor who ran it, a lean, tired man named Adam Ferris, who had been there 6 years and looked 10 years older than he was, came out of the back office holding a letter and did not seem to know what to do with his face. The building had changed hands overnight. The new owner had executed a lease with the clinic for 20 years at a rent of $1 per year, non-cancelable, with the maintenance obligations on the landlord. Ferris read it 3 times out loud to the room. Nell drove out to the house that evening and found Emmett in the study with papers spread across the desk, and she was shaking, and it was not from the cold. She asked him whether he had any idea what it looked like, a place like that suddenly belonging to a man like him, and what happens to a clinic when people start to wonder who owns it. He said he did. She asked him why he had not spoken to her first, or to Ferris, or to anyone at all, and Emmett put his pen down and told her, without any particular emphasis, that the building had been under a demolition agreement since October, that the sale was scheduled to close in March, that the whole block was going to come down for a parking structure, and that he had seen the filing because he sees filings. He said that if he had asked her first, she would have said no, because she says no. It is the only thing she owns, and she spends it carefully. He said that she would have said no, and he would have respected it. And in March, the doors would have been chained, and something over 200 people who have nowhere else to go with a fever would have had nowhere else to go with a fever. And then he picked his pen back up. Nell stood there in the middle of the room with her coat still on. She went through it once, and then again, looking for the place where his logic came apart, the way she had gone through the notary block on that page under the streetlight, 1 line at a time, waiting for the thing that did not fit. It was not there. Everything he had said was true, and every part of it was in her favor, and there was not one word of it she could argue with. And that was precisely the problem, and she understood in that moment that she had never in her life been in a room with a man who could take away her right to refuse by being right. She did not say any of it. She looked at him a moment longer, and he glanced up and saw that she was looking, and neither of them spoke. Then she turned around and went out, and the silence she left behind her was the loudest thing that had happened in that house in weeks. He was worse by the middle of that week, and worse again by the end of it, and the thing that nobody else in the house seemed to register was that he was not worse all the time. In the mornings, he read the sports page and made a joke about the bullpen. By late afternoon, his hands had begun to tremble, and his mouth was so dry he could not finish a sentence without reaching for the glass. And by evening, he was asking whose house this was. Nell noticed it, because noticing it was the only skill she had left that nobody could take from her, and she started writing it down, times of day and what he could do at each of them, on the back of a grocery receipt, because she did not want a notebook lying around. On the Thursday, she came in and found him in the chair by the window with his slippers off, and his feet were still in bad shape from 3 days out on the pavement in February, the nails grown long and thickened and split, the heels cracked open, and nobody in that house had touched them since he came home, because nobody in that house had ever been the person who does that. So she went and filled a basin with warm water and got a towel and a pair of clippers, and she sat down on the floor at his feet and put his heels in the water and left them there a while, and then she started at the smallest toe of the left foot and worked across, taking a little at a time, filing the edges smooth, doing the cracked places with lotion afterward, holding each foot in both hands to steady it. She did not talk. He did not talk. The radiator ticked. Outside the window, the lake had gone the color of pewter. It took nearly an hour. Emmett came to the doorway partway through and stopped there and did not come in, and he stood watching a woman he had known for less than a month kneel on the floor and hold his father's ruined feet in her hands like they were worth something. And he understood, standing there, that in 23 years nobody had ever touched Wendell Boyd that way. Not one person. People had shaken his hand and taken his coat and driven his car and killed for him and lied for him, and no one had ever once knelt down. That same afternoon, Dr. Halbrook came out from the city with his bag and spent 40 minutes upstairs and came down and delivered his findings in the living room with the fire going. And the findings were advanced dementia, likely of some years' standing, currently in rapid decline, and he said that in his professional view, the incapacity petition was not merely appropriate but overdue, and that he would say so to the court. Royce Dunham nodded through all of it with his chin down and his eyes wet, and put his hand over his mouth once, and said quietly that he had prayed it was something else. And Nell, standing near the doorway with the basin still in her hands, said that it was something else. She said the confusion was worse every evening and better every morning, and that dementia does not keep a schedule like a bus. She said his mouth was dry, his hands shook, his skin was hot and flushed, and that she had watched all of that arrive at the same hour of the day for 6 days running. She said this was not a disease. Halbrook did not even turn around. Royce said, gently, that they were all upset. Halloran looked at his hands, and someone in that room said the thing that ended it, which was that a woman with no home and no license had no business offering a medical opinion in a room with a physician in it, and everybody went back to talking, and Nell stood there holding the basin with the water going cold in it. She was still holding the basin when he came out into the hall, and it was there under the good light of the sconces, with him buttoning his overcoat and reaching for his bag, that she saw his face straight on for the first time, instead of in profile across a room, and something in her chest went very cold and very still. Nell Whitaker had sat in a hearing room downtown 3 years earlier, on the 4th floor of a building on Michigan Avenue, at a long table, with an empty chair beside her where an attorney should have been sitting if she had been able to afford one, and there had been 5 people on the panel that day, and the one in the middle, the one who had done most of the talking, the one who had said in a mild, reasonable voice that the charting irregularities were significant, and that the board could not simply overlook them, regardless of what she believed she had reported. And to whom was this man? He had signed the order. Her license had been suspended pending further proceedings, and there had never been any further proceedings, because further proceedings cost money. She looked at him now with the basin in her hands and the water going cold, and he glanced up and looked back at her, and she watched it arrive on his face. Late, the way a word arrives on the tongue an hour after you needed it, and she saw the exact instant he placed her. Neither of them said a thing. He took his hat off the table and said good evening to the room in general, and went out to his car, and Nell stood in the hallway and understood, with perfect clarity, several things at once, that the only person in that house who could read a medication record was a person this man had already erased once, and that he knew it, and that from this evening forward, everything she said out loud would be an argument she could not win. So she stopped arguing. She had spent 4 years in a trauma bay, learning that when a room does not believe you, you do not raise your voice, you build a record, and that the record outlives the room. She started that night. She went through the kitchen cabinet where the boxes were kept, and laid every one of them out on the counter, and photographed the labels, and she wrote out by hand what was written on each, and set that against the prescriptions in the folder Halloran kept, line by line, name against name, count against count, and where the numbers did not agree, she wrote them down, and did not say a word about it to anyone. 2 days later, she took the bus into the city with a signed release Wendell had given her on a good morning, and she stood at the pharmacy counter and asked for the printed dispensing history for the past 18 months, which is a thing a patient is entitled to, and which nobody had ever asked that pharmacy for. And the clerk printed 9 pages, and she photographed every one of them there at the counter, before she folded them into her coat. And then, before she touched a single box in that house, before she moved anything or removed anything or told one living soul what she was looking at, she went to a copy shop on Ashland Avenue and mailed a full duplicate set to Pruitt's office with a dated cover letter, describing what it was and where it had come from and when. And she kept the certified mail receipt, and only after that receipt was in her pocket did she go back out to the house. 4 years in a hospital had taught her the whole lesson, and not just half of it. You do not spring a trap. You document it first, in your own handwriting, with a date on it, in somebody else's hands, and then you spring it. It came back to him on a Sunday morning, and Nell knew it the moment she walked into the room, because he was standing at the window with his hands behind his back, and he turned around and said her name, her whole name, first and last, which he had never once done. He asked her to sit down. Then he took off the steel watch, working the buckle with fingers that were steadier than they had been in 2 weeks, and he held it out to her and told her to keep it somewhere safe, because there was going to come a day fairly soon when he would look at it and not be able to tell her whose it was, and he would rather it was in the hands of somebody who knew. She took it, and then Wendell Boyd told her what had happened, and everything she thought she had witnessed on Michigan Avenue rearranged itself while he was speaking. He said that about a week before he walked out of this house, he had woken up one morning entirely himself, the way he had this morning, and had sat in that chair and looked at his own hands and understood that something was being done to him, not happening to him. Being done. He said a man does not spend 50 years reading other men and then fail to notice when his own mornings are clear and his own evenings are gone, when the thing arrives on a schedule the way a delivery arrives. He said he had spent that entire clear morning thinking about who was in the house. He named the people who came and went. He named the man who wrote the prescriptions, and the man who carried the folder, and the man who had poured his whiskey for 30 years. And then he stopped, because there was one more name and he could not get past it. Nell asked him what he meant, and the old man said that he had not called his son. He said it plainly, without softening it, that he had sat there with a telephone in reach and had not picked it up, because he did not know, because everything in this house came through Emmett. Because the accountants answered to Emmett, and the schedule answered to Emmett, and the doctor had been engaged by Emmett's office, and because a man who cannot trust his own evenings cannot trust his own reasoning either, and if he was wrong about his boy, then making that call would be the last thing he ever did. So he had not made it. He had waited until an evening when the house was thin, and he had walked out the service door in a sweater with no coat and no telephone and one slipper that came apart on him somewhere around Devon Avenue, and he had gone on foot and by bus, and on foot again for 3 days, across the whole length of the city, toward the old warehouse at the South Berth, where there was a floor safe under the boards in the back office, put in before Emmett was born, that nobody living knew about except him. He said there was something in that safe that would settle all of it. He said he had gotten within 3 blocks. He said he remembered the cold and the sound of the traffic, and then nothing at all, until a woman was kneeling in front of him in the rain, buttoning a coat onto him, and that he had spent every clear hour since then trying to get one thing back. And Nell asked him what, and he said the combination. He said he knew the safe was there, and he knew what was in it, and he could see the room it stood in, the water stain on the ceiling, the smell of the oil on the floor, and he could not produce 6 numbers. He turned and picked up the pad from the table beside his chair and showed her, and the top sheet had a row of figures written out in a shaky hand, and under it another row, and under that another, and when he turned the page there were more, page after page, 6 numbers at a time, crossed out, torn off, begun again. Days of a man sitting alone in a chair by a window fishing in the dark for something that used to be his. He said he had tried in the mornings when he was clearest. He said sometimes he got the first 2 and lost the rest. He said it was like putting your hand into a pocket you have put your hand into 10,000 times, and finding it sewn shut. Then he put the pad down and looked at her and said, in the same steady voice, that he did not know how many more mornings like this one he was going to get. Neither of them had heard Emmett come up the stairs. He was standing in the doorway with his coat still on, and one hand on the frame, and he had been there long enough to have heard all of it, and the thing that had gone through him was not the poisoning, and it was not the safe. It was the sentence in the middle, that his father, alone in a room, sick, frightened, had gone through every name in this house, looking for someone to call, and had reached his, and had stopped, and had chosen instead to walk out into February in one shoe. Emmett Rourke had been 11 years old when that man picked him up off a sidewalk on the south side and took him home, and in the 23 years since, no one had ever seen him weep, and no one saw it then either, because he turned his face away toward the hallway and stayed like that until he had it back. The inspector came to the clinic on 22nd Place on a Tuesday morning, with a laptop and a clipboard, and the flat, pleasant manner of somebody who has done this 400 times, and she was there about the intake logs, and then she was there about something else. She had a name. She wanted to know in what capacity a certain individual had been present in that building on 11 separate mornings, and whether that individual had at any time been in a room with a patient, and Adam Ferris stood at his own front desk and heard the sentence that follows that question, which was that a facility operating under a community health license does not get to have a person under a board suspension anywhere near patient care, that the exposure is not to the individual but to the license, and that the license belongs to the clinic and not to him. She was not unkind about it. She said she would need a written account of the individual's role and dates of presence, signed, and she said that if the clinic's account was complete and the practice was discontinued, the matter would, in all likelihood, close there. Ferris asked what happened if he did not provide it. She said then it would not close there. He stood in his own hallway for a while after she had gone. 211 people had come through that door in the last 7 days. There was one physician in that building, and it was him. And there was no second name on the roster, no partner practice down the road, no hospital system standing behind it with a foundation and a spare doctor. If the license went, the doors chained the same week, and every one of those 211 people went back to using an emergency room as a clinic or, more often, using nothing. So he sat down at the desk with the form, and he wrote it out. He wrote her name and the dates, and the description of what she had actually done, which was mostly triage and vitals and cleaning wounds. And he wrote it honestly, and it was damning precisely because it was honest. And he signed it at the bottom, Adam Ferris, M.D., with the date, and he had the front desk send it that afternoon. Then, instead of letting the copy go out in the mail to her, which was what the process required, and what would have taken 3 or 4 days, he got in his car and drove north out of the city to a house he had never been to in his life. and stood at the door in a corduroy jacket, in front of a man in a dark suit who did not want to let him in, and waited until Nell came out. She looked at his face and knew immediately. She asked him, quietly, whether he had come out here to apologize, and Ferris said no. He said that an apology would be for his own benefit, and that he had not driven 40 minutes to feel better. He said he had come because she was going to receive a document with his signature on it inside the week, and he was not going to let her open an envelope alone and find out that way what he had done to her. He said the words out loud, all of them, the finding, the dates, the fact that he had written the description himself and had not shaded a single line of it in her favor. He said there had been 211 people through that door in 7 days, and that he had counted them twice before he signed, as if the counting were an argument, and then he said that it was not an argument, and he knew it. Nell did not say anything for a moment. Then she asked whether the clinic was safe now. He said probably. She said good, and she meant it, and that was somehow worse than if she had thrown something at him. And he drove back into the city with his hands at 10 and 2 the whole way. That same afternoon, in the parking structure on Wacker Drive where Emmett left the car when he came downtown, a woman in a gray coat was standing between 2 rows of vehicles as he came off the elevator, and she did not offer him anything. She did not mention her office or her case or what she could do for him. Ruth Calloway simply walked up and put a single folded sheet of paper into his hand, and Emmett opened it and saw a copy of a court notice, and on it the date and the hour set for the medical capacity examination of Wendell Boyd by the physician appointed by the probate division, and it was closer than he had let himself hold in his mind. He looked up to say something. She was already walking away toward the stairwell, and she did not turn around, and she did not say one word to him, and that silence did more work on him in 11 seconds than any offer she could have made. Somebody at the pharmacy on Wells Street mentioned to somebody else that a woman had come in and asked for 18 months of dispensing history on the Boyd account, and had photographed all 9 pages at the counter, and by that evening Royce Dunham knew it, and by the following afternoon there were men working the lower level looking for her, which is where they went, because that is where you go when you want to find somebody who used to have nothing, and because whoever sent them still believed that a person like that has only one place to be. Nell was down there because she had gone to collect the last of her things from a woman named Pearline who had been holding them, and she was 200 feet in when she came around the pillar and saw the pair of them at the far end of the roadway. City shoes, good coats, one of them holding up a phone with a photograph on it to a man sitting against the wall. She did not run. Running is the thing they are watching for. She turned into the service bay and went down the ramp and through the gap where the fence had been cut open 4 years before anyone had ever heard of her. And she came out into the lower roadway with the low ceiling and the fluorescent tubes buzzing every 30 feet and the constant hollow noise of the city driving overhead. And this was the country she had lived in for 14 months. The hole underneath of downtown, the loading bays, and the ventilation grates that blow warm all winter, the stairwells that are unlocked and the ones that only look unlocked, the pillars you can stand behind and be invisible from 3 directions. She knew where the light pooled and where it did not. She knew which doors opened outward and would slow a man for half a second, and she was not alone down there, which was the part the men in the good coats had not accounted for. Pearline was the first. She was 71 years old, and she had a shopping cart with a tarp lashed over it and everything she owned inside it. And she saw Nell coming, and she saw what was behind her, and she did not ask a single question. She simply pushed that cart out into the middle of the lane and let one wheel drop into the gutter channel and stood there fussing with the tarp. And the cart was wide and the lane was narrow, and it took the 2 men the better part of a minute to work their way around an old woman who could not seem to hear them and could not seem to move any faster. That minute took Nell to the cross tunnel. There was a man there they called Bishop, who had been under Wacker Drive longer than anyone and who spoke about 4 sentences a week. And when the 2 men came through and asked him whether a woman had gone past, he pointed east with his chin and said, in a voice as flat and bored as a person giving directions to a bus stop, that she had gone up the ramp toward Michigan and had been moving quick, and they went east, and she had gone west. Nobody down there asked her what she had done. That was the thing she thought about afterward, more than the running. Not one person asked. A kid with a sleeping bag over his shoulders held a door for her at the base of the freight stairs and closed it behind her and sat down on the step in front of it. 2 men playing cards on an upturned crate moved the crate 18 inches to the left so that it blocked the sightline down the corridor. A woman she had never spoken to in her life took off her own scarf and handed it over, so that the coat would not read the same color from a distance. They passed her along, hand to hand, the way you pass a bucket at a fire. From Pearline to Bishop, to the kid on the stairs, to the two men with the cards, and each one of them held her for as long as they could, and then sent her on to the next. And none of it was planned, and none of it was spoken about. And the whole thing worked, because every one of them had spent years learning exactly how invisible they were, and had decided, that afternoon, to spend it. She came up out of the ground 25 minutes later on the east side of the river, 3 blocks from where she had gone down, into the daylight and the noise, with her hands shaking and a stranger's scarf around her neck. She stood there on the sidewalk, getting her breath, and it went through her with terrible clarity that the 8 people who had stood under the dry awning on Michigan Avenue in their good coats, the ones who had raised their phones and let a coin fall into the water in front of her boots, could not have saved her that afternoon and would not have known how. And that the ones who had just done it, every single one of them, owned less than the price of the shoes those people had been standing in. He went down to the South Berth that night because of the warehouse, because his father had crawled across the whole city toward a floor safe in the back office of it, and because Emmett wanted to see the room with his own eyes before anybody else thought to go looking, and the yard was a bad place to be at that hour. A grid of stacked containers, 8 high with the lanes between them, running black and straight like streets in a town where all the lights have failed. It had rained earlier, and it was raining a little still, and the concrete held the water in long sheets that threw back whatever light there was. There were 4 of them waiting, and they were not Royce's own people. They were the kind you rent, and the first thing Emmett heard was not a voice but the sound of a container door being hauled back on its hinges somewhere off to his left. That long, ugly iron shriek, which is a sound made deliberately by men who want you to turn your head in the wrong direction. He did not turn his head. Headlights swung across the lane from the far end and put everything into hard white and hard black for a moment, and then swung off again. After that it was mostly footsteps, the wet, flat slap of them on the concrete, coming from more than one direction, and the whole thing lasted less than 2 minutes, and neither side had anything in their hands louder than what they were born with, because a gunshot in that yard brings the harbor police, and everybody there understood the arithmetic of that. Emmett took something badly early on, and kept his feet anyway, and finished what he had gone there to finish. And when it was over, he walked the length of the lane back to the car on his own, and it was only when the door was shut and the yard was behind them that he let his weight go into the seat and stopped pretending. His driver said the name of a hospital. Emmett said no. Every emergency room in the county has a duty to report, and a report becomes a police file, and a police file 11 days before a probate hearing becomes an exhibit, and there was a judge in this city who was going to be asked whether the son of Wendell Boyd was a fit person to be anywhere near him. He said, "Take me home." So they brought him into the kitchen of the house by the lake a little after 2, and Ramona lit the room, and then Nell came down the back stairs in a sweater with her hair loose and looked at him for about 4 seconds and said, "Clear the table." They got him onto it. The overhead fixture was no good, so she had them hold a work light and a flashlight from opposite sides, and she sent Ramona for the kit and for towels and for the kettle, and then she put her hands on him and began. She did not talk much, and what she said was not comfort. She counted. She counted his breathing out loud, low and steady, the way she had counted an old man's breathing on a sidewalk in the sleet, and she made him match her, and every 90 seconds or so she asked him a question with a number in it to hear how he answered. Her hands did not shake. That was the thing the 2 men holding the lights talked about afterward, in the way men talk about the only part of a night they are able to describe. That the boss was on the kitchen table, and there was a woman working over him with her sleeves pushed up, and her hands were absolutely steady. At one point he tried to give an instruction, some arrangement about who should be told what in the morning, and he got about 6 words into it before she put her palm flat on his shoulder and pressed him back down against the wood and said, without raising her voice at all, that he was going to lie still and be quiet, because this was the one room in the city of Chicago where he was not the one giving the orders. Nobody in that kitchen breathed for a second. Then Emmett lay back and shut his eyes and did what she told him. And while all of that was happening in the kitchen, upstairs in the little office off the back hall, Ramona Diaz had already done the thing she had been carrying around for 4 days. Her husband had been on dialysis for 2 years, and the coverage had run out in the fall, and a man had come to her at the market on a Sunday and had known the name of the clinic and the day of the week and the amount, and had asked her for one small thing, which was photographs of the pharmacy record in the folder in that office. She took them. She sent them. But she had been a housekeeper in houses like this one for 26 years, and she knew exactly how these stories end for the woman who cleans. And so, before she sent anything, she made her own copy of every page, and she kept every message that man had ever sent her, all of them, in a phone she did not use for anything else. Then, near 4 a.m, with the kitchen light still on downstairs, she went and stood outside Nell's door in the dark hallway, for a long time with her hand almost raised, and in the end she did not knock, and she went back down the corridor to her own room. The Boyd Foundation held its 30th anniversary dinner in the long room at the Corinthian Hotel, with 300 people at the tables and 12 cameras along the wall. And Nell went because Halloran said that not going would be reported as an absence, and an absence would be reported as an admission. She got through the soup. Then a man she had never met, a probate attorney named Grieve, who had been retained by Royce Dunham 11 days earlier, went up to the lectern during the remarks and said that before the evening continued, the Foundation's supporters were owed some candor about the household currently surrounding its founder. He read from a document. He read the caption of a disciplinary order from the State Board, dated 3 years earlier. He read the words, "License suspended, pending further proceedings." He said that the proceedings had never been completed, and that the suspension had never been lifted. He said the underlying matter had involved charting irregularities in a case in which a patient had died. He let that sit. Then he raised a second sheet and said that he had in his hand a report signed 9 days ago by a licensed physician of this city, a good man by every account, describing the presence of that same individual in a clinical setting on 11 separate mornings, the taking of vital signs, the dressing of wounds, and he read Adam Ferris's name from the signature line and the date under it. 300 people turned in their chairs. Grieve said that this was the person now living in the house of a man the court had been asked to declare incapable of managing his own affairs. Nell stood up because sitting had become impossible. She had answered every room she had ever been put in. She had answered the men in the corridor with paperwork, and she had answered Halbrook with a receipt, and she had answered a man at a diner table line by line on a napkin. She opened her mouth in front of 300 people and nothing came. Every word in the document was true. That was the trouble. Every single word of it was true. Then the doors at the back of the room opened. Wendell Boyd came in on his own 2 feet, in a dark suit, with his tie done properly, and his hair combed flat. And he did not shuffle, and he did not look around for help, and the noise in that room fell away table by table like a wave going out. He walked the whole length of the center aisle. He went up the 2 steps to the platform without touching the rail. He took the microphone out of the stand the way a man takes something he has owned for 30 years. He said good evening. He said his name. He said that he had built this foundation with his own hands, and that he was aware there was a proceeding underway to determine whether he still had the sense he was born with, and that he would say a few words while the question was open. He was sharp. He was funnier than anyone had heard him in 2 years. He named 3 people at the front tables and thanked them by their first names, and remembered what their fathers had done for a living. And then he stopped, and something changed in his face, and he said that there was a piece of business he needed to attend to before he lost hold of it. And he began to speak more slowly and much more carefully, and he said that in the back office of the old warehouse at the South Berth, under the floorboards behind the desk, there was a safe, and that everything a person needed to understand this situation was inside it, and that the combination was as follows. And he said it. 6 numbers, out loud, into a live microphone, in front of 300 people and 12 cameras, spacing each one, repeating the third because he wanted to be sure of it, the way a man reads out something he has just found in a coat he had given up searching. Emmett was already moving along the wall. Wendell looked out at the room. He started the next sentence. He got 4 words into it. Then he stopped. He looked at the microphone in his hand as though he could not think what it was for. He looked at the tables, the glasses, the flowers, the 12 cameras. He turned his head and found the man coming up the side of the room toward the platform, the man in the dark coat with his hand already out. He looked at him for a long moment with an expression of perfect, ordinary courtesy, and he said, quietly, into the microphone that was still live, that he was sorry, but who was this? Nobody in that room moved. Grieve did not have to say one word. He simply set down the 2 documents he had been holding, because he no longer needed them, and the 12 cameras along the wall kept running, and the rescue was over, and it had taken 11 seconds, and it had handed the other side everything. Royce Dunham reached the platform first because he had been standing nearer, and he did the only thing left to him. which was to take the old man gently by the arm and say loudly enough for the front tables to hear that he was going to get him somewhere quiet. And then he moved him off the side of the platform and through the door into the service corridor, with a hand on his back the whole way. And by the time Emmett came through that same door, the two of them were 40 feet along it. What followed happened in a passage, 2 people wide with a tiled floor and a ceiling of pipes, past the racks of covered plates waiting to go out, past the open mouth of the dish room, where the steam came rolling out in a hot white bank that made everything past 10 feet a shape rather than a person. There was the rattle of a serving cart going over. There was the flat drum of the swinging doors and somebody in kitchen whites shouting at everyone to get back. There was the sound of shoes on wet tile, quick and then slower, and a man's breathing gone ragged and loud. Royce kept the old man between himself and the door, kept turning him, kept talking, and Wendell went where he was steered because he did not know what any of it was. Then, near the freight elevator at the end, the old man's knees simply went out from under him, all at once, without a sound. Nell had come through the kitchen the other way, and she got there as he was going down. She put her arm under him and took his weight and let him slide. And she got him flat on the tile and her hand behind his head before it reached the floor. And she jammed her boot into the track of the elevator door, so the panel bumped back open and stayed there, and nobody was going anywhere. Then she knelt over him with 2 fingers under his jaw, and she began to count out loud, steady and unhurried, the way she had counted on a table in a kitchen and on a sidewalk in the sleet. And she did not once turn around to see what was happening at her back, because behind her Emmett had already put Royce Dunham face down across a stack of milk crates and was holding him there with a forearm and 1 knee, and neither man was saying anything at all. The safe was under the boards in the back office of the warehouse at the south berth, exactly where the old man had said, and it opened on the first attempt with the 6 numbers he had read into a live microphone. Halloran was there, and Ruth Calloway was there because Emmett had made 1 telephone call at 4 in the morning that he did not explain to anyone. And the room smelled of oil and river damp, and there were 4 pages inside. They were not what anyone in that room expected. Every man in that organization had spent 11 days assuming that the old man had gone across the whole city in 1 shoe to protect his succession. And what was in the safe did not name a successor. It was an instruction to wind the entire thing up. Sell the yards. Close the berth. Dissolve the holding companies in the order listed. Every clean asset into the foundation. The buildings, the properties, the accounts, all of it, and everything else stopped, permanently, with a schedule attached, and the name of an outside firm to supervise it. It was signed and witnessed, and at the bottom of the last page, under the signature, in handwriting that had gone thin and unsteady and had pressed hard enough to score the paper, there was 1 line that had not been typed by anybody. It said that he had picked his boy up out of this thing once, and that he was not going to let it have him a second time. Emmett read that line standing in a cold room in his good coat. And then he read it again, and he handed the page to Halloran because he could not hold it steady. And Halloran, who had been carrying the other half of it since the afternoon and had not found a way to say it, told him then. The power of attorney was genuine. It had not been forged, and it had not been obtained by fraud. It had been executed 40 years ago, before Emmett Rourke was born, in a lawyer's office on Roosevelt Road, by a younger Wendell Boyd, who had signed it without reading past the first paragraph, because the man he was signing it in favor of was the man he had slept beside on a warehouse floor for 2 winters, the man he had shared 1 overcoat with, the only person on this earth he had trusted without reservation. Nobody had tricked his father. His father had handed it over himself, out of love, and Royce Dunham had simply waited 40 years. What finished it was paper of a different kind. The 9 pages of dispensing history that Nell had photographed at a counter on Wells Street. The certified mail receipt with a date on it that predated everything. The duplicate set Ramona Diaz had made before she sent her copies to a man at a market on a Sunday. And a signature on a dispensing log that did not match the hand of the physician whose name was under it. The probate division heard it on a Thursday morning. The petition to declare Wendell Boyd incapable of managing his person and his affairs was denied. They had Royce Dunham in a room off the loading dock of a building on Cermak Road that had no windows and 1 door, and he was sitting in a folding chair with his coat still on and his hands loose on his knees, because he had been in this business long enough to know that begging is the one thing that makes it faster. 6 men waited in the corridor outside. Not one of them spoke. Every man out there had a fairly precise idea of what happened next, because in 23 years there had never been a night like this one that ended any other way, and 2 of them had already worked out between themselves who would take the car afterward. Emmett stood in front of him for a long time and did not sit down. He was thinking about a pad of paper on a table beside a chair by a window, and the pages under the top page, and the rows of 6 numbers crossed out and begun again. A man alone fishing in the dark for something that used to be his. He was thinking that his father would never be able to say the name of the person who had done that to him. That whatever happened in this room tonight, Wendell Boyd would not know it had happened, could not be told, would not remember being told, and that no accounting made here would ever reach the only man it was owed to. Royce said his name once, quietly, the way he had said it across a dinner table for 30 years. Emmett took his phone out of his coat. Royce watched him do it, and something in his face came apart, because in that room a telephone was not a thing anybody reached for. And he said, and his voice was not steady, "Now, who are you calling?" Emmett said, "The only person in this city my money has never been able to buy." Then he put it to his ear and gave Ruth Calloway the address, and told her the door would be open, and stood there against the wall with his arms folded until she came. The men in the corridor did not understand what they were watching. Some of them never did. Downtown, in a room on the 9th floor with a table and 2 chairs and a legal pad, an investigator was sitting across from Margot Kessler, who ran the Foundation's public affairs, and who had arrived that morning with counsel and the expectation that this would take 20 minutes. He put down 2 things in front of her. The first was a printout of a post from her own account, time-stamped, with the view count on it, the video shot on Michigan Avenue in the sleet under a banner with her employer's name on it. The second was the intake and transfer log from the clinic on the near west side, with the hour written in a nurse's hand when 3 men in good overcoats had walked into a treatment bay with a folder of documents. He asked her to read the 2 times out loud. She read them. The gap between them was less than a day. He asked her whether she understood what she was looking at. Margot said that she did not. He said that the Boyd organization had been searching for that man for 3 days and had not found him, that 46 locations had been checked and none of them were right, and that whoever wanted him found had exactly nothing to work with until a video went up with a recognizable face in it, and a location and a time, and better than 1 million people looking at it. He said that her post was the only thing anyone ever had. Margot sat back. She said, and her voice had gone very small and very fast, that she had just made a video, that it was nothing, that it was a joke at a party, that people put up things like that every hour of the day and it means nothing at all. The investigator wrote something on the pad without looking up. He said yes. He said that was correct, that it had meant nothing to her, and that it was the only map they had. The plea went in on a Monday morning, and it took 11 minutes. There was no trial, and there were no theatrics, and Emmett Rourke stood up in a courtroom on Dearborn Street in a gray suit and answered the questions in the order they were asked, and agreed to 18 months, and to the forfeiture, and handed over the yards and the berth and the holding companies and the books that went with them, all of it, in the order the schedule specified, which was the same order his father had typed out on 4 pages and locked under the floorboards of a warehouse before either of them knew what it would cost. Halloran said afterward that a better lawyer could have gotten him 12. Emmett said he had not asked for a better lawyer, and that the point of the exercise was not the number. That same week, in a small place on Wolcott Avenue 3 blocks from the residential center, with the yellow bulbs over the counter, and the radiator hissing, and 2 slices of pie on the table between them, and the sound of plates going into a tub somewhere behind the register, Nell told her brother the truth about the last 14 months. She had rehearsed it in her head on the bus, and none of the rehearsals survived contact. She told him there had been no apartment. There had never been an apartment. She told him about the loading dock behind the hotel, and the cardboard, and the 3 layers and the boots with the tape on them, and she told him she had described a place with a window over a park, because she had needed him to picture something when he thought about her at night. And she said that she had lied to him every single week for 14 months, and that he deserved to hear it from her mouth. Toby listened all the way to the end without interrupting, which he had learned from her. Then he reached into his backpack and took out the spiral notebook, the fat one with the corner gone soft, and he opened it and turned pages, past the harbors and the 2 crossing rivers and Long Whistle Road, until he came to one near the middle. He turned the book around and pushed it across the table. It was an apartment, drawn from the inside, in pencil, with a window on the left wall, and a park out the window, and trees in the park, and a bench. And the curtains at that window colored in with the green pencil, the same green she had described to him on a telephone 11 months earlier, and never mentioned again. He said, around a mouthful of pie, that he had known she was lying. He said it the way a person says they have known about a surprise party. He said that when somebody tells you about a place 4 different times, and the kitchen moves, you know, and then he tapped the page with 2 fingers and said that he had gone ahead and drawn it anyway, and gotten the curtains right, so that there would be somewhere for her to come back to. Nell put her hand over her mouth. She had not cried in the hearing room 3 years ago. She had not cried on the loading dock, and she had not cried in the corridor with the supply cart on the floor, and she had not cried under Wacker Drive with a stranger's scarf around her neck. She cried in a diner on Wolcott Avenue over a slice of pie, with both hands over her face, while a 12-year-old boy patted her arm and told her she was making a scene, and grinned about it, and then asked whether she was going to finish hers, because if she was not, he would. The permanency hearing took a morning, and it was not the name on the household that decided it, because there was no name on the household anymore. What Pruitt put in front of the court was 14 months of volunteer sign-in sheets from 3 shelters and a meal service, a lease with Nell Whitaker's own signature on it, a payroll record, a letter from a physician on 22nd Place, who drove downtown to hand it in himself, and the testimony of a 71-year-old woman who had known the boy's sister since before any of this began, and who sat in that chair with her hat in her lap and told the truth about her without embellishing a word of it. Toby went home with her that afternoon. He carried the notebook under his arm the whole way and would not let anyone else hold it. The medical board reopened the old file 8 weeks later, once somebody outside the room had a reason to pull the underlying case and look at what had actually been reported and to whom, and the suspension was vacated and the license restored with an apology so brief and so carefully worded that Nell folded it once and put it in a drawer. The same thing had destroyed her and saved her, 3 years apart, and it was the truth both times. And she thought about that more than she talked about it. Adam Ferris was the one who told her the last part, in the kitchen, standing up, because he had learned by then that she preferred to hear things straight. He said that the scans and the workup had come back, and that underneath everything that had been done to Wendell Boyd, there was something real, early, quiet, and its own. He said the poisoning had not caused it. He said it had only reached in and taken the last few good years off the front of it, and that those years were not coming back. She asked how long they had. He said nobody knew, and that anyone who gave her a number would be guessing. The Boyd house opened that autumn in the old warehouse at the South Berth, the same building with the same water stain on the office ceiling, 90 beds upstairs, and a walk-in clinic on the ground floor, and a rule posted at the front desk that everyone is called by their name and never by a number. On the first night, a woman came in off Cermak Road with wet shoulders and nothing over her sweater, and Nell went to the hook by the office door and took down the old green coat with the mismatched stitching in the lining and put it around her and buttoned it, and that was where that coat stayed. For 18 months she recorded a video every week. She would set the phone on the table by the window, and Wendell would talk to his son, and in the beginning he told the old stories properly. The docks in the 60s, the winter, he and another young man shared one overcoat between them. The day he found a boy of 11 going through his pockets on a sidewalk on the south side and took him home instead of turning him in. Later he started to stop in the middle and ask her who the young man in the story was. She would tell him. He would nod and say, "That's right," and go on with it, and finish it beautifully, and never once fail to finish it. On the morning the gate opened, the 4 of them were waiting on the far side of the road. Nell, and Toby, who was 14 now, and taller than her, and Ramona, who had driven, and the old man in a wheelchair with a blanket over his knees and his hat on. Emmett Rourke came out with a paper bag under his arm and stopped when he saw them. He crossed the road, and he did not go to his wife first. He went to the chair, and he got down on both knees on the wet asphalt in front of it, so that he was lower than his father, and he took hold of the arm of the chair and looked up. Wendell looked back at him. He did not ask anything. He simply smiled, warmly and courteously, the way a man smiles at a stranger who has been kind enough to stop and say good morning, and he patted the back of Emmett's hand twice. Then he turned his head and saw the woman standing behind him, and his whole face opened. Coat girl. Some people spend a lifetime accumulating things they believe will make them worth something, and lose every one of them, and find at the end that the only thing that survived was a moment when they gave away what little they had to someone who could never pay them back. That is what memory keeps when it lets everything else go. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like it, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to our channel so you can join us for a new story every day. We would truly love to know how this one landed with you. So tell us in the comments what you felt while you were listening. Because we read every word, and there is nothing we value more than hearing what is in your heart. Until next time, we wish you good health, peace in your home, and quiet joy in your days. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.